Notion calendar is disappointing. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just disappointing with the development and what's actually come out as a product. Going beyond the obvious limitations in that it is a separate app, not Notion specific, so it's not Notion all in one, it's Notion plus Notion calendar. And to my knowledge, it doesn't work with anything apart from Google Calendar, so Outlook's out of the question and any sort of CalDAVs are also out. But looking at Cron, what Notion calendar was, I compared Cron to Morgen, which is my calendar app of choice, and Morgen to me was better, and I thought, oh, you know what, Notion's going to do all these things with integrations, and Cron, even though it might not beat Morgen in other areas, the Notion integration will be better. For clarity, Morgen is free, it does have a free plan, but to get the Notion integration, so all integrations are on the Pro plan, £7.27, that's pounds, so I think that's about $9 per month if you buy it annually. And I should probably mention there is a 15% discount if you switch from Motion, Reclaim, Fantastica or Sonsama, and then there is the 25% discount if you're academic or student. I don't think you can combine them, but they're worth noting. And then for those completely unfamiliar, Morgen Pro also gives you Morgen Assist, which is like a separate app similar to Zapier sort of thing, with integrations with tasks and events and stuff inside of Morgen, but that's another video. Those thinking that's expensive, if we look at Sonsama, that's $16, so that's like $7 more expensive per month. Motion is similar, $19 or $12, that's more expensive. If we look at Akiflow, again another competitor to Morgen, $19.34, like they're expensive apps. Fantastical is cheaper from what I can see, but if you want to do anything that's actually useful, you need to really be paying for it. The free plan doesn't do it, whereas in Morgen you can do everything for free apart from the integrations, and Fantastical isn't available on anything apart from Apple, whereas Morgen's available on literally everything. But I'm not going to say Morgen is the best app. It is for me, it might not be for you, but when we look at Notion Calendar and the integration between like Notion and Notion Calendar and Cron, I'm confused. Taking a quick look at the app, when I'm in my calendar, I have the day view, which is why I've got the day view here. I've got to click there, and that's D, and then go to the week is W. I'm showing my events calendar. I'm hiding all of the other calendars for the moment. If I open up Morgen quickly, you can see it opens up in the day view. I can go to week, and then there's the week. I can make it full screen, go side, and then come back down. That is what I use most of the time. I'm inside of my app using hotkeys, so that was Alt-C, global hotkey, spacebar to close the sidebar, which is there, and then the D, and then the W to get to the weeks and the days. That's inside the sidebar. The Notion Calendar app is an app that you can't global hotkey. The global hotkey is, let me get this right, Control-Shift-Q? Yeah, there we go. And it's down here is this little bar here. That's it. So I've got nothing on this screen. I've got Obsidian on another screen. But if I use that hotkey, it brings up the agenda, but it's not actually the app. If I click it, it then opens up the app. Whereas Morgen, if I Alt-C, I'm actually in the app. So it's a functional bar. It's not just a hotkey shortcut bar. Then as I look at the app space, I've got this small calendar up here, which, to be honest, I'm never going to use because I'm not going to navigate this way. I'm going to use hotkeys with the arrows. So arrows going right and left to go backwards and forwards between weeks, or for me, it would be between days. That's what I'm going to do to navigate days. I'm not going to click on the calendar unless I'm planning something way in advance. So for me, this is kind of like a waste of space. Showing the calendars here seems a little bit like a waste of space because yes, if I want to see the calendar, I can go in and out, but why not add it to a hotkey? So for example, if I go into Morgen, I have all my calendars. If I want to show everything, I push 0 on my keyboard. Now it's going to show everyone's calendar. 1 goes back to me, 2 goes to something else, 3 goes to something else. So I can see the calendars I want to see at the push of a hotkey rather than filling up the space with all these calendars and then having to click and work out which calendars I want to see or which calendars I don't want to see. And yes, you can get a monthly calendar in Morgen. It's down the bottom, and there it is to go backwards and forwards between the days. Then moving over to the right side, you have the event information, which totally makes sense. And you can see this calendar task is actually from Notion, so it lets me go back to Notion, which I'll get to in a second. But if I want to check my calendar, so say I'm writing inside of Obsidian, this is what I'm using, and I bring up my calendar, this is as small as it can be, and this right sidebar fills up literally all of the space. And then if I open up the other sidebar, now I can't see the calendar and it's just this stuff. So I have to have the whole thing open. And if I collapse this down, because it's an app, if I click on Notion, it disappears and I can't see it. And then I have to come back here and then open it up again. Whereas in Morgen, when I open it up, it's there. If I click on Obsidian, it stays there. If I click back to Morgen, it goes on to Morgen. So it doesn't disappear. I can see all the information. If I want to go more into detail, I double click, and there's all that information rather than it filling up the space that I actually want to see in my calendar. So I can see all of the different things that's going on. Now I'm showing my task calendar. So when people say, oh, this is aesthetically pleasing, it's more aesthetic, I don't know. Then, now that we're looking at my week, you can see everything that's going on. If I scroll up, you see all this dead space. This is sleep time. And maybe I'm missing something, but I can't find a way inside of the settings There. See, I can start on Monday, I can go to today, that's the hotkey, that's great. Meetings, 4 hours, yeah, that's great. But I don't see a way to get rid of the time that I'm asleep. I'm not going to schedule something in a time where I'm asleep, so I don't want to see this. And having to scroll down to actually get to my day just seems like a waste of space. Not to mention this blank space over here on the right. But when I come into Morgen, it starts when I want it to. So it starts at 6 and then goes till 12. So I don't have to scroll at all. It shows my day. If I go to tomorrow, there it is. There's my start of the day. There's no scrolling back. And going into the preferences and the general, you can see you can start at literally any time, end at any time, change the resolution, which those options don't seem to be available in Notion Calendar. And then the last thing before I get to the actual integration part is if we look, I'm showing the main calendars that I'm using. I use my calendar as a project manager to manage what's going on, and I have my projects in the all-day events. You can see 11, 9, 9, 9, so I can hide them, which is fine, but when I show them, I have to scroll up and down to see them all. I can't just see them, and I can't make this bigger either, which is just annoying. I have to scroll up and down to be able to see what's going on, where again, as you can imagine in Morgen, I can just show them all. I can limit this to 2, or I can make it all the way up to 20. Again, general settings, limit events per day. I have it maxed out at 20, but you can make it any number. I will talk about tasks a little bit later. Notion Calendar doesn't have tasks, obviously, but these two things in the all-day event inside of Morgen doesn't show because I've done them. I've finished these two things, but in this calendar, I have to see them. And for clarity, I use Notion rarely when I'm working with other people on a combined script. I don't use Notion for tasks, for projects, or anything like that. I use Morgen and Obsidian. So this next bit is from my understanding of the Notion Calendar app and Notion use. I used Notion years ago for like 3-4 years, did the consultancy thing and all the rest of it. So I'm not incompetent at Notion, but I'm not up to date with Notion. This is where I expected the Notion Calendar integration to be better than Morgen's integration. Let's have a look. So I'm inside of Notion. This is my Notion workspace. I have a calendar database. If I click into it, it's just a database called calendar database. I have a table, then I have a to-do calendar, which is filtered for the checkbox is unchecked. And then I have a done calendar, which is filtered for, as you can imagine, checkbox is checked. So we've got calendar done, and then in to-do, we've got calendar task and calendar event. If I go to table to show them all, I then also have a calendar unscheduled. Then I have a table database that has no calendar view. It has a table task, a table event, and a table task 2. This one's got a due date. It's got some descriptions, checkbox, and some other information in, which I'll go through later. Let's clean this up for a second. Let's just hide that one, hide that one, hide that one, and hide that so we can actually see what's going on. And we have my orange event calendar and then the 2 different calendar views. So I've imported them. Control K, database, show Notion database, then calendar database, and then I can go done or to do. So they are the 2 different views of the calendar database. I click on done, it says calendar has already been added. Now at the moment, you wouldn't know which view is which because it just has calendar database in. But if you remember, the done event was calendar done, so that's all the way on Sunday. So I know the yellow calendar is the done calendar, so that's calendar done, so it's been done. This is a calendar event, and that's a calendar task that's been brought in. But if I go Control K, database, and then I search for table database, I can't import it. So this database cannot be brought into Notion Calendar because it doesn't have a calendar. Now if I go to Morgen, Alt-C, and then push spacebar to bring up the tasks, here's what I did before. If I go to Notion, there's the calendar database, and there's the table database. So the application that isn't tied in with Notion can see databases that isn't a calendar view. I don't understand the logic here, Notion Calendar. Now, having said that, Notion Calendar has calendar views, as you can see here, whereas Morgen is just the database. So when I go to calendar database, this just shows all of the pages inside of that database, with size limits, of course, which I'll show later on. Now, in this example, obviously I've got to do and done, which are actually more tasks than events, so I'm not sure how you would filter the calendar inside of here. Maybe these are all projects and you want to have a video projects calendar or something else project calendar, which makes sense. But when you're inside of Notion Calendar, you'd have to come in and tick them on, tick them off to see the filtered view or not, so you're likely just to show them all, which inside of Morgen, you're going to see them all anyway, so I'm not sure the practical use case for the filtered view calendars. Now, when I come back to Notion, there is no way to see, so if I go calendar task, I can open this up, there's no way to see this inside of Notion Calendar. like at all. There is no link to it. I have to go and actually go into the Notion calendar and then see it here. If I click on the task, I click open Notion, then it will open it up in Notion. But there's no way to go from Notion to the calendar. It's only from calendar to Notion. Now, yes, I know you can push the open in calendar button, but if I'm looking for this event, if I open it in calendar, it just opens up the calendar view. It doesn't actually open to the event. And for Morgen, it's exactly the same. If we go here, you can see I can open up in Notion, and then it will open it up inside of Notion. Where I was expecting the Notion calendar to outperform Morgen, if I come in, you can see, okay, I can change this event. So let's just add change to it. So I've changed the title of the calendar event. If I go back to Notion, I've changed that information. And it's the same as if I go down to the calendar task and I change it, it will change the time there. And if I go back to Notion, you can see the calendar task time has now been changed. This from the outset looks great, but if I'm managing my stuff inside of this calendar, my question is, why would I need it inside of Notion? If I'm inside of Notion, I'm managing the dates and times inside of Notion. If I'm inside of my calendar, I manage them inside of my calendar. Having them synced, yes, is nice, but I don't see where I would need them like synced, really. If you have a specific use case, let me know. Morgen, on the other hand, because it's just like all the other integrations, so Todoist, Google Tasks, or whatever, you can see there is a padlock on the integration because it's a task and it's only editable inside of Notion. So the due date inside of the properties is Notion specific, but you can still schedule it. So let's say calendar task, it goes onto there. You can see we've got the little Notion icon because it's in Notion. If I click on that, it takes me to the task, which yay, it goes back there. And if I double click, it brings up all that information. And because the task has now been scheduled, it has a planned start, a planned end. So it's now got Morgen specific task information. So the due date here is in Notion. That can't be changed, but the planned start and planned end, which is Morgen specific, can be, which means you can obviously change the task description stuff inside of the calendar as well. So if you're focused inside of your calendar, then that's where all the work would be. That's where you can edit it. And let's double click and unschedule that. And then when you unschedule it, it goes back into the task list, or if you're showing the scheduled task, then it'll always show there. So Notion, yes, does the syncing better, but it only syncs the name and the due date. The description of the event isn't editable at the moment inside of Notion Calendar, and that might be because it's not even viewable inside of Notion Calendar. But before going into that information, you can see here we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got the 3 different events from the calendar database inside of the calendar, but there are 4, and in Notion Calendar, if there is no date on the event or task, there is no way to see it in the calendar app. So you have to go into Notion to find the unscheduled event or task, bring it into Notion Calendar, and then you can edit it. Whereas in Morgen, let's just close down these for a second, you can see there is the calendar unscheduled, so it's actually there. Wait, but there's only 3. There's only 3 because it's being treated as tasks. So the pages don't need a date. Not only do they not need a calendar view in the database, they don't need a date, and you can still see them in your planning app. You can see this one is ticked, done. If I tick this off, so now it's to do, it should now be in a to do calendar. Yes, it is. If I go back here, it should have changed the color. It hasn't quite changed the color. It's added it. Let's just refresh it. Why is it still in yellow? It's not in yellow anymore. There we go. Okay, a couple of refreshes. It works. But Notion Calendar is sort of slow. And if we go into Morgen, you can see it's there. Okay, that was pretty quick. Morgen has the same sorts of speed. That was a bit deceptive. Morgen, sometimes you need to refresh it and then it will show it. But you can see now we've got the calendar unscheduled. There's the calendar done that we've just ticked off. So if we go back to Notion, you can see there's the tasks. They're all unticked. So now they're all showing. If I tick this done, calendar done, it's now been done in Morgen, where you see it syncs up. Now in Notion, yes, it is done. And in Morgen, it's disappeared. If I then tick this out, I will now show you, I'm going to refresh. And now when I push the refresh button, it brings it back in. Notion Calendar, to my knowledge, does not have that at all. And then if we go into these events, you can see, just as a reminder, all we can see is the date, the time, the database that it's from, and then the name. In Morgen, we have more information. If I go into the 3 dots and come into the display labels, you can see we've got the select field, the due date, the related task, so that's a relation property, estimated duration, and status. I can show or hide whatever I want inside of this view. When looking at the grouping, if I go to grouping, you can see I can group by select field, so it's now to do, done, working, and then no select. That's the select information from the Notion database. Now I can say here, organize then by, let's say, related task. So now you've got the to-do section, related task is calendar task event because that's the one related. If I want to organize by status, now I've got to do and then not started because obviously I've matched them up, but you now have grouping and subgrouping with the tasks and events. I can hide the empty group, so now it doesn't show groups that are empty. So let's actually find a group that's empty. So I'm grouping by the select property. We've got to do, working and done, and the calendar unscheduled doesn't have anything in the select. So if I come into here, let's say to do, and then let's just give it a refresh to speed this up. And Morgan's actually outsmarted me there. It's actually hidden the group automatically. Inside of Morgan tasks, you would then hide the empty groups, but it seems like it's doing that already for you. But when I do push the hide empty groups, you see overdue, that's going to disappear because there's nothing overdue at the moment. Let's now remove that from there. Let's hide the to-do, because actually, no, let's not hide the to-do. Let's hide the done. Let's say we don't want to see those. Let's just refresh it. So the calendar unscheduled, this one here, is going to appear into a group down there. There we go. So we've got the no select, working, to do, because we don't need the done. And let's just put the working above it. So we've got working, to do, and then done down there. I'm going to leave the ordering as manual, but you can use any of those properties again. So related, due date, etc. So you can filter, sort, order, group by the property information from the Notion database. A reminder, Notion calendar users don't get any of this. I don't understand. For those eagle-eyed, you can see calendar database. If I go down to the table database, there is the table database. So this is the database the Notion calendar couldn't bring in because there's no calendar view. Well, Morgan can bring it in with all of the same options. When you drag something on, there's the event. Now it's been given the planned start, planned end information. You've got event information, and you can drag it out. Then you can click on Notion and it takes you to the Notion page. There you can add the information. Double click, unschedule, and you can see here this is the setup. So if I go to 3 dots, edit Notion preferences, it will bring me to this page. Now, to be completely clear, when you're inside of Notion, you go to the 3 dots, then you may need to go to connections and then connect the database. Otherwise, Morgan won't be able to see the database. So at the moment, if I come to add a database, I only have the template database available. If I then add a new database inside of Notion and I go back to the settings, let's just come up and refresh, scroll down, add database, you see template database is the only one available. And that's because inside of this database, I need to click on the 3 dots, then go to add connections, then type Morgan, click on Morgan, confirm. So now I've given Morgan access to the Notion database. Now when I come back to the sync settings, go refresh, scroll down, add Notion database, I can now add the new database and then do all of this stuff. This is the Morgan Notion integration, Notion calendar, so you can select which task to import. So only tasks assigned to myself, so you can check the assignee property of a database and say, yeah, bring those in or bring them all in. I don't think you can do that in Notion calendar. Define when a task is complete. We've been using the checkbox, but you can use a select and say, okay, it's done. That will be the complete, so it's not going to show inside of Morgan tasks. Or if it's a status and say, yeah, if it's done, it's not going to show inside the calendar. Again, Notion calendar, why don't you have this? I'm going to go back to checkbox and say, if it's selected, the task is done. Help us map the properties. So the property at the moment is the description property. So if I look at the table database, you can see there's the description property. That's the one I've mapped it to. But if I was to come into Notion, add another property, let's say new text. Let's just bring that in. So now we've got a new text property. Let's drag it over next to description. Going over to the Morgan Notion integration, let's just refresh. Now inside here, you would see it if I paid attention. This is the calendar database and I changed the data, that one. So yeah, there it is. So new text. So there you've got the new text property from the table database, which is the integration. That's obviously the same option as above, but it's looking at the database properties and saying, okay, use the new text one as the description being shown. You can do the same with adding different date properties. So looking at the estimated duration, if we go into the eye, you can see it's only the number property, which is why this is a number property. This is 3. It's looking at it going 0.5 is 30 minutes, 1 is 1 hour. So 3 should be 3 hours. If we come into here, we've got 3 hours. And then if we, didn't want to do that. If we drag this on, it's giving us 3 hours because that's the estimated duration. Doesn't mean you can't change it. You can make it smaller or larger, but the estimated time will still be 3 hours. Let's unschedule that. Having a look down at the bottom notification, so everyone is aware, it will import the 200 of the most recent tasks as a maximum, and all of those properties are available. including the relation property. So if we have a look inside of this calendar, so we've got related tasks. This is actually a relation to itself. So if I drag this over, you can see the calendar task is related to the calendar event change, and the calendar event change is related to the calendar task. And you can see that information inside of Morgen. So those that are using Notion as a task project manager, if you've got tasks that are related to a project, you can see the project inside of Morgen, or any other use case you may think of. Jumping back to Notion Calendar, inside of the Notion Calendar events, as I've mentioned, there's little information, but if we go into another event, there's a option to link docs, and you can link a Notion doc via search, which is great. So let's say calendar database. Now I've got a link to the calendar database. If I click on it, it then opens up the calendar database. This is inside the Notion app, of course. And in Morgen, let's just add this task in. I can do that, one, inside of the Notion task, because now it's inside of Morgen, so I can edit the description. And you can also do it in other events as well, because obviously Morgen has other events. But I come in, I copy the link to the page. I then paste the link inside of Morgen, and then I save it. So now I have the link to the page. No, I couldn't search for it, but once you found it, it's there. And something else you can do in Morgen is link to local files. So if I go to this script I'm working on at the moment, you can see there is a local file to my Obsidian linked in Morgen. When I try and use the link inside of Notion Calendar, it doesn't work. So you can see here's my Obsidian, and if I click on the link, nothing happens. It doesn't work. If I go to Morgen, I double click, I click on there, it then opens up that file inside of Obsidian. Yeah, it's squished a bit, but it's there, so it still links to local files. And then to round it up, obviously in Notion there's no tasks, so there's no recurring tasks either. In Notion you can't have recurring tasks, but Morgen, if you go to Morgen, you then have recurring tasks because they're just like events, they're treated like events. If I click on lunch, it's repeated every day. Dog meds, it's repeated every day, every week, whatever. So all the recurring events you can have can be tasks inside of Morgen. Notion Calendar doesn't have that. Now I'm going to reiterate, I'm not saying go use Morgen or don't use Notion Calendar, it's bad. I'm not saying that, I'm just showing that the integration between Notion Calendar and Notion seems less flexible, less usable than the integration between Morgen and Notion, which it baffles me. And to top this all off, Cron were acquired by Notion Calendar, a year ago? And it's taken them a year to develop that? Maybe not a whole year to develop it, but questionable. And then Morgen started working on the Notion integration after they developed Morgen Assist. So they've been doing it for a couple of months? Like I said in the title, Notion Calendar is just disappointing.